Greetings from St. Paul's Church National Historic Site in Mount Vernon, New York, shown here in these images of the 18th century stone church and adjoining historic cemetery. Welcome to another edition of History from St. Paul's. Today, we explore the interesting changes in the 180-year history of the buildings that have occupied the current setting of the museum at St. Paul's, which is pictured here. In the mid-1830s, a wooden horse shed was constructed on the site adjacent to the stone and brick church. The erection of the barn indicated the improved fortunes of the parish, especially the benevolence of one wealthy congregant, George Rapelier, who also purchased a small wooden case pipe organ, shown here, at the time, donated lumber for the shed, which was assembled by local laborers. Reflected in this wide-angle image of the church and cemetery from a distance, St. Paul's was a modest parish, serving perhaps 90 congregants, but it remained the only church in the rural, dispersed town of Eastchester, about 20 miles north of New York City, and many people arrived on horse-drawn carriage. Measuring about 60 feet by 40 feet, the rectangular shed was assembled using a common post and beam design with swinging doors opening for animals and vehicles on the side closest to the church. A small corner of the shed peeks out at the lower left edge of a photo shown here of the village green in St. Paul's in the 1860s. Construction of the shelter also represented available room on a spacious village green, which actually belonged to the town, and suggested the continued cooperative relationship between the municipality and St. Paul's. To accommodate the people who traveled to the church on the chief transportation mode of the day, represented by this image of two women seated in a horse-drawn carriage, the town and parish pledged a substantial piece of real estate to the shed. As families retrieved their carriages, we can imagine the conversations that occurred here: weather, farming matters, news of parishioners serving in the Civil War, even the tragic assassination of President Lincoln, which is depicted in this colorful illustration. In 1888, the improved economic fortunes of the parish, especially one generous widow, Martha Wilson, led to the replacement of the horse shed with a masonry carriage house. This initiative overlapped with the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the first post-Revolutionary War service in the church, which is described in the article from the New York Times shown here. The stronger facility could accommodate large parish events, including a multi-course banquet commemorating the centennial, when the masonry shelter was, quote, converted into a temporary dining hall before being turned over to its equine occupants, end quote. In the design of the masonry carriage house or hitching shed, as contemporaries called it, we distinguish the outlines of the building we know today. A rectangular structure with a large arched opening at the front or western side for the vehicles, and 8 vaulted windows on the north side along the edge of the street. The image presented here shows the dismantling of portions of the masonry shed to facilitate the construction of the new parish hall in 1925. This conversion emerged from the eclipsing of the horse-drawn wagons through the triumph of the automobile, a seismic shift in transportation represented by these images of cars from the 1920s. The finished one-story parish hall building with an A-frame slanted roof and an extended foyer entrance at the front is shown in 2 photos and 1 drawing here. The changes in transportation overlapped with the shrinking in size and fortunes of the St. Paul's congregation, and some parishioners objected to the parish hall project as poorly timed and too ambitious. Final cost for the parish hall was $20,000, or about $250,000 today, mostly covered through bank loans, which were not satisfied until the 1940s. Several families left St. Paul's because of their strong opposition to the erection of the parish hall, but the carriage house was anachronistic and a different utilization of the space was warranted. A new roof was installed, and powerful crossbeams, seen here, were bolted together to provide stability. Metal rings which facilitated the hitching posts on the north wall were retained and remain visible today in the image shown here. A sizable brick hearth, shown here, was carved into the south wall for heat. Cleared of the horses, the new parish hall proved to be quite elastic, accommodating an impressive variety of church and community activities over the next 55 years. Regular uses were fellowship on Sunday following worship and Sunday school, but there were other uses. This photo shows many people saluting the flag at a July 4th celebration in the parish hall in 1941. Governor Franklin Roosevelt and his wife Eleanor, who are seated in this photo, dined at a banquet there following a Descendants' Day event June 14, 1931. This image shows the 1937 St. Paul's basketball team, which played its home games in the hall. In 1941-2, during extensive restoration work in the church sanctuary, religious worship and baptisms were held in the hall. Strawberries were consumed at the church's annual June fair. As shown in this series of photographs, the post-World War II housing crisis, created by the turn of millions of soldiers to civilian life, led the minister to establish temporary living quarters for his trusted secretary and her husband, a returning veteran, in February 1946. These recent photos of a procession at a well-attended outdoor July 4th celebration and a two-person historical play behind the church with an attentive student audience help explain the contemporary use of the structure. It became a visitor center and museum to serve new purposes when St. Paul's became a National Historic Site in the 1980s. These images show crowds of people reading from panels on a wall and people seated while listening to a speaker. They document how the creation of this unit of the Park Service generated a need for space to display historical exhibitions, welcome visitors, present multimedia, and enjoy talks on history. As seen in this image, an oak floor was installed in the 1980s along with museum partitions and overhead lighting to properly illuminate the exhibitions. It's a long way from the wooden hitching shed of the 1830s, and it might be interesting to speculate on the utilization of the building 100 years from now. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you at the next episode of History from St. Paul's.